Sandy with Nora's podcast.
Hey, Nora.
Hey, Sandy. Oh, that sounds like you got a frog in your throat.
I have like 17 very sick frogs in my throat. And, I don't know what to do about it. There's no making me sound better for this episode. So sorry, everybody. You're just going to have to deal with it. I am so sick.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it sucks. I mean, I just came off of a really, really great week. One of the huge capoeira schools here had a great what's called a battesado and formatura. And so there were dozens and dozens of people here from out of town. And, we're all in close quarters, fighting, dancing, and playing capoeira with each other. And, I guess someone was bound to be sick. So I guess I got some of that, some of that love. Thanks for that. But it was a lot of fun. And, I guess I'm getting a prescribed downtime after all of that excitement.
Well, I hope that you're drinking a lot and you're putting lemon in your mouth and cucumbers on your cheeks and all that kind of stuff that helps you feel better. I think.
I don't know. Cucumbers on I've never heard that before. Lemon, ginger, all that good stuff is happening. Took a COVID test this morning. It was negative. Also negative for flu A and B strain.
Oh, you got those tests. I love those tests. I haven't been able to get those tests yet.
Really? Oh my God. I've got so many of them. But yeah, it's always good to know, but I ain't going anywhere. I'm staying in this apartment for the foreseeable future.
Well, thank you for sharing yourself with us anyway today. I guess that's the magic of radio. No one's getting sick from you today on the air. But I always find when I'm sick that there's not much else I can think about than being sick. Do you have the same kind of experience?
Not at all. What? No, you know what? Actually, I'm going to edit that. There are a couple, it depends on how sick I am. There are a couple times, and that's the thing. Definitely when I had shingles during COVID.
Ooh.
Y'all, don't get shingles. Shingles sucks. Please don't get shingles. It is extremely painful. That is all I could think about for sure when I had shingles. But mostly when I'm sick, I just read a lot, watch movies. So I'm like distracting myself from being sick by doing something else completely.
Well, that's nice. That's great. And I think maybe we'll talk a little bit about illness today and what's going on in the world. Before that, though, we have some announcements and we have some gratitude.
Some announcements and some gratitude. Nora, I'm going to be in Sudbury soon.
No, look how lucky you are.
Yeah. I mean, I said I wasn't going anywhere for the foreseeable future, but this is foreseeable and it is in the future. So I lied. I'm going to be in Sudbury on June the 4th. There's going to be an event talking about local politics. I'll give you folks more information next week as we firm them up with the folks who are hosting it. But I love Sudbury, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, that's so great. I'm a little bit jealous because I love Sudbury too. Though on June 4th, I'm going to be in the Sudbury of the Prairies. No, the London, Ontario of the Prairies, Regina, but not for anything public. So all I can say is I'm going to be in Regina hanging out at a conference that I guess you can still register for if you are a union communications person or a communications person in general. Just check out uniontraining.ca and you can find out more about that conference. If you're curious, you're very, very, very welcome. But I don't tend to talk too much about that side of my life with this side of my life. So yeah, I guess I'm inviting you all to that too. Regina, June, 5th and 6th, but I'll be there on the 4th. Woo.
And beyond that, do we have anyone to thank this week?
Yes. Thank you so much to everybody that shared last week's episode, that commented on last week's episode. I've been thinking a lot about AI actually, and after the conversation that we had, and there's been a couple of things that have happened in the last week that have made me think more I'm trying to find the right words because it's not like I've not changed my mind. I haven't my mind isn't even more made up. I'm just kind of like, oh, there's so much here that we need to get our heads around in society. So before I say that, I will say thank you so much to the folks that donated for the first time, including Danielle and Kate. Now, it was so weird to hear my partner say that he walked into the bank to do some banking and they insisted that he two-factor authenticate to be able to do the banking.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's actually a really important democratic discussion to be had when our photo-issued government ID is no longer apparently good enough for the banks.
Yeah. It's a bit of an issue. It's a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that there needs to be a mediator that is neither the bank nor the government.
Right. Like who said that was okay? Now, in my partner's case, he's got a cell phone. So he had to say to them, sorry, you're going to have to take my driver's license and my health card, which are both photo IDs in Quebec. And they ended up taking it. But it's like, yeah, like when did we outsource to Google or to Samsung or to Apple, like identifying who we are in relation to things like to high security things like bank accounts or whatever. And it just seems like that is a crossing, or obviously we have already crossed yet another high watermark of surveillance when we have allowed, I mean, without any public debate or discussion, these corporations to say, no longer will we trust the government's own system of personal identification. We want you to also prove yourself, prove that you exist through your cell phone. It's like, it's really bad.
Yeah, it's really, really bad. And there's so much of that. It's that two-factor authentication is becoming more prolific with all sorts of things that we interact with. So it's a weird thing that's just become accepted that, again, as we discussed last week, we haven't had like a societal debate on like how we, whether we want to have these companies act as mediators for all of the private things that we do. I've seen some stuff this week as well. There were some videos that went viral of graduations across the United States. Have you seen any of these?
No.
Where graduation speakers are like talking to the crowd about, like the invited speaker for commencement or whatever, talking about how, like we're moving into an AI economy and how amazing it's going to be. And then the entire graduating class starts booing. Just like as they're, the speakers are extolling the wonders of AI and the fact that the graduating class is moving into this new economy. The graduating classes are like booing them. So they're pretty funny videos. There's a couple of them. And then there's one that's even more tragic, a video where even more tragic, but that is just kind of tragic and sad, but also funny. It's a video of a graduation ceremony where whoever is, I don't know, the person running the thing goes up and is like, yeah, so, well, that's it. I know a bunch of your names weren't called. That's because we started using this like AI thing to do the name calling. And it missed a bunch of you. And unfortunately, because we have all your name cards already, you turn them all in. We're not going to be able to call you.
Oh my God.
We're not going to be able to call your names, but you can come up and get your photo taken. And I hope that's like what you're really here for. And like everyone starts booing again. It's like, yeah, you guys.
Yeah.
There's so much evidence that these systems suck.
That is unbelievable, especially given like...
And also, why would you need an AI system to read the names of the students? That
doesn't make any sense.
It just seems like more work. I don't get it.
Well, I don't know how they did it for your graduations. I don't have any recollection of my high school graduation. But my university graduation, there were so many of us that we just gave a name ticket to the person who then read it.
Yeah, I feel like that's how all graduations do it. I mean, I've had 3 now. They all feel exactly the same. You get a little card with your name on it. As you're walking up, you give it to a person. That person gives it to a person with the mic, and that person reads it.
Yeah. I guess AI is going to fix that entirely to make it magical.
Yeah, magically your name won't get called. We did get a comment from a listener that I really loved, who was like, just thinking about the way we were talking about how AI, steals things from people, and that, the answer isn't necessarily like strict copyright regulations over intellectual property, which I want to say to that person who sent that in, I absolutely agree. I mean, actually, Nora, your partner, I remember showing us and a bunch of students at a different time this great Everything is a Remix project. Do you remember that stuff? And like how great it is that we can build on one another's ideas and work, but like so much of the way that copyright works gets in the way of that. And just like, if you just think about how amazing art could be, creation could be, like any sort of creation could be, if we were not stuck on making sure that we had like this value of personal property attached to it. Like, this is mine, and if you want to exploit it, you have to pay me. Like, if there wasn't, the mediation of capitalism and all of the things that we create, oh man.
Totally.
Well, we wouldn't be having these conversations about AI, I'd tell you that much. It wouldn't just be money-making schemes.
Totally. If anyone is curious about this documentary, it is super worth watching. It was called RIP, a Remix Manifesto, and it was written and directed by Brent Gaylor. Girl Talk, the artist, features prominently in the documentary. And I don't know what happened to Girl Talk. If anybody knows, feel free to let us know. But their music was pretty wicked, actually. It was pretty wicked, and it sampled from a lot of other tunes that you would recognize, and then be put together in these kind of like crazy collaborative medleys. And so, yeah, if that's something you're interested in, it was from 2008. I wonder if it holds up. I haven't seen it since probably 2009. But if you are interested in issues of copyright, definitely check out that documentary.
Yeah, and there's another documentary called Everything is a Remix that I'm pretty sure your partner told me about too. I can't remember, but it's by Kirby Ferguson, which is also a good watch, which is more just about how ideas do just kind of build on one another, even if we try to like keep them apart. But that's not quite what AI is doing. AI is literally taking all of our stuff to make a bunch of money and trying to exploit us. But it's worth taking a look at these projects. They're really, really good, and we'll have you thinking differently, hopefully, about the way that copyright works. So thanks to that listener who sent that in.
And we said that we have an announcement. Stay tuned. In the next week or so, we will be crowdfunding for something super special and super important. We'll give you all the details once it's actually out. But watch, there will be a chuffed fundraiser for us to raise a bunch of money to be able to hire somebody to do a very in-depth investigation into something that we've talked about on this podcast before, that I think that our listeners will be very keen to help support, and that frankly, no mainstream media is doing this, and the alternative media have been doing what they can, and we want to get involved in it as well. So a little teaser for you. Next week, I think we'll be ready to completely announce the crowdfunders. So stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Okay, so I sound like this. There's a bunch of people stuck on a cruise ship somewhere because of the hantavirus. Ebola is spreading. Nora, you are a pandemic expert despite, really wanting other people to be doing the work and you being the only person doing it. It just feels like a good time to ground down and to be like, what did we learn from COVID? What should we have learned? Have we learned the lessons? What's going on with all of this sickness right now?
Oh my goodness. Well, before we started recording, Sandy, you said something like it seems like the most important message coming out from journalists right now about the hantavirus is that it's not COVID. And that's how that's how it's presented. Yeah, like don't worry. I mean, I haven't seen people say don't worry, it's not like COVID. I've seen people say don't worry for other reasons, but it's kind of that message. Don't worry, this is not COVID. And that it's kind of a shorthand to say other things that are not explicitly being said. And so, yeah, in this episode today, we want to talk about pandemics and illness and what you should be worried about and what maybe you don't have to be as worried about. And ultimately, the lessons that we learned from COVID, they're totally still in play. They totally still matter. And kind of the biggest lesson, which was that the government doesn't care if we die or are sickened to an extent that it becomes chronic. That's unfortunately still the case. So maybe let's start with the hantavirus, number one. And of course, the biggest question, who's going on cruises these days?
Is that the biggest question?
No, I don't know.
I mean, I'm really glad that you said that the messaging is to stand in for something else because, it may not sound obvious until somebody puts it that way to you, but it is. That's exactly what they're saying. When someone is saying to you, either as a public health official or someone from the media is saying to you, this is not COVID, I think that they're trying to communicate a few things. One, don't panic. Two, we are not planning to shut down anything because of what's going on right now. Three, we don't expect governments around the world to need to respond in the way that we really needed to respond to what was happening with COVID, though. And I think the final message is that you will see some measures being taken, but they're unlikely to really affect your life. Is that what you're picking up from that message as well?
Yes. I think that the number one kind of self-soothing thing, don't panic, is kind of the most important message that's being transmitted. And you have to remember, this was very, very evident during 2020, 2021, though I don't know if it was evident to people that weren't reading as much news as I was, but that oftentimes, these articles are written by journalists who are telling themselves as well as telling you what everyone wants to hear. And one of the things that everyone wants to hear is to not panic. I think that that's an okay thing to hear. I think that telling people to not panic is not the same as saying don't take this seriously or whatever, but it is a good reminder that there's rarely circumstances where panic is warranted, right? Panic is really not a useful reaction, but it is also a very primal reaction. So trying to calm people down, there's a really difficult line that I think that has to be walked between saying, here's maybe the scale of seriousness versus here is how you might find yourself reacting, and is that reaction warranted or not? The second piece, though, which is what you also mentioned, is don't worry, it's not going to be like COVID in that there won't be lockdowns. There won't be mass disruption to our economy, to your jobs. You won't either be locked into your house or forced to put yourself at danger. And that also goes back into the don't panic kind of mode. But there are reasons for that. I think that being put out there in this way with the hantavirus, that the novel coronavirus, the COVID, that was very warranted, because when that was emerging, it was demonstrating what many epidemiologists and other scientists have been saying for a long time, that these kinds of symptoms and this kind of spread in this period of time is indicative of a greater threat than other things that we've seen. And with the hantavirus, all indications are that it's a serious virus. It's a virus that it's not novel. It's not new, that we've seen it before, that it's carried by rodents, and that we need to be careful about it. But it is not necessarily, it's not like if you've got, rats in your cottage, do they have the hantavirus? Probably not, is the message that we're hearing from experts right now.
Yeah. The concern with this particular strain of the hantavirus that they're talking about is that there's human to human spread. But the way that the epidemiologists have been following it, it doesn't seem like it's going to rise to the level of concern. Concern is not the right word, to the level of response that COVID required. But there's some different, they're talking about the Ebola outbreak quite differently. It seems like this one is a major, major concern. It has spread very, very quickly, and it's a particularly deadly strain. And both of these cases have me wondering with so much of the infrastructure for like the world's ability to respond in a coordinated way to outbreaks was reliant on the United States, which is like, I think the public policy for outbreaks like this right now in the United States is to just like deny that such things exist. So I don't really know. I know that listening to some reports, it's been there were some remarks from international scientists about how weird it was that the CDC just wasn't involved in what was going on with the hantavirus, and that they hadn't really said anything, and what a change that was from previous outbreaks. And there's been cuts all over the world as a response to some of the backlash to what happened with COVID. And I wonder, if there is another pandemic or even epidemic that is of major concern, are we ready, Nora? Like, are we looking at a worse situation because of what has happened since COVID, and because of the ways that we didn't really deal with what happened socially and how that affects what societies are willing to support?
Well, like we didn't learn any of the lessons that had been begging us to be learned during COVID. Like, I think that that's really, really important. And some of the lessons that we learned have obviously stuck with us. Like with the hantavirus reporting, everyone was really focused on the person-to-person contact. We understand what that means. Animal-to-person jumping of the zoonotic diseases. We kind of understand what that means too, because we learned a lot about that during COVID. We being average people, of course, scientists studying this know all of this already. And then there are things that were very COVID-esque, like what's the incubation period or what's the exposure period, and what's quarantine happening? How is quarantine happening? How many people who get this illness die from it, right? Like talking about it in terms that are very, very human and very much based on the fact that we've all had these experiences, right? In very recent memory, pretty much anybody listening to this podcast probably was in self-quarantine at some point in the last 5 years. Maybe you were in official quarantine. You probably did the math on when you may have been exposed to COVID and when the symptoms appeared. And so like the media has been reporting it through those kinds of terms because the population has been sensitized to it. But I think that the bigger question, of course, is like, what were the structural changes made in society to try and, get ready for the next big pandemic, to stop the next big pandemic? And as we all know, there hasn't been the kinds of changes that are needed to be made. And so, one, cruise ships, they still exist. The cruise ships, HVAC systems they're not made to get everybody away from an outbreak necessarily. They don't have like 100% turnover rate of clean air that you might, see in a hospital, or you might see it like cruising altitude on an airplane. So that's very, very bad. And of course, everybody is sitting on this floating ship. And while respiratory illnesses are one thing on a cruise ship, there is a lot of open space on a cruise ship. Like there's a lot of deck space, and there's wind, and that helps to minimize some of the aerosol spread, because of course, the second that aerosols are taken by the wind, they're going to not likely just fly right up your nose or into your eyes. They'll probably just kind of, go off into the air. But like cruise ship outbreaks more often than not tend to be like the what are they called? Norwalk, or the noroviruses, right? Like the viruses that you get from eating some sort of contaminated food, and so then all these people get sick. And also, as you're listening, many people have probably experienced that. I know Sandy and I think you were there when we were at a hotel for a conference once where everybody got Norwalk.
Definitely was not.
Oh, you
I
weren't.
was not. Thank God. No, I was not. Gross.
But you heard about it.
I sure did.
It was so fascinating because everybody got it from the same meal. And so, and it hit everybody pretty much the exact same time. And so, we were all in meetings together, and one by one, people would just kind of go to the bathroom and not come back. And then you're like, what is happening? And then it hits you and you're like, oh, that's what's happening. And yeah, we all got sick. So those are kinds of outbreaks that are, they're definitely dangerous, because if you are, for whatever reason, more susceptible to getting that kind of ill, and then the illness gets even worse for you, these are dangerous, but they're also relatively common in that, many of us will have experienced something like that in our lives, right? Without like the massive disruption of what we saw with COVID. And so COVID, like this was rare for a whole bunch of reasons in terms of how big it was, but partly because of how international it was and how the international response had to be so coordinated. And I think that when it comes to Ebola, the risks of Ebola are well known. How fast it can travel is very well understood. There are vaccines for certain strains of Ebola. There's not a vaccine for the current strain that has been detected in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. And of course, like the DRC is a place that's been massively destabilized by war, by fighting over resources. And it's not too surprising that when you have a situation of destabilization within a society, that's where you're going to see diseases spread, right? And so I think that given that we've got these two kind of big stories, one, a hantavirus that's connected to South America. There have been cases in Argentina of hantavirus in the last many years, versus Ebola happening in the DRC, in a place where there have been around a place where there have been other Ebola outbreaks. I'm not surprised, but I think it is very interesting that the Western media has really, really focused on the hantavirus and not talked very much about the Ebola outbreak, even though by global measures, it's much more significant.
Yeah, and I mean, that would be like one of the lessons not learned. I mean, there was a lot of xenophobia and racism that was caught up in the COVID spread and initiation of COVID, like the initial spread. And remember, Donald Trump calling it the China virus, and the sorts of discussions that were going on that was very, very xenophobic. And it seems like we certainly haven't learned that lesson if we're comparing the hantavirus and the Ebola outbreak right now. But the other thing that, there's a whole slew of other things to be nervous about. Some of global concern, some of more national concern. It's in Canada. One of those things that are global is, of course, the lack of funding that the World Health Organization now has for pandemic readiness. I mean, when the United States pulled out of the World Health Organization following the COVID-19 pandemic, the WHO lost 1/5 of its funding, and a lot of that funding is put towards making sure that they're ready for pandemics and for outbreaks. And so this is a major problem that hasn't been resolved on a global level that we should be concerned about. And then locally, there's a couple of nationally, there's a couple of things that I'm concerned about. One is that we haven't really done much or anything to resolve our issues with respect to education on health, like public education on health, public education on vaccines. Because if there is another global pandemic that results in a treatment that uses vaccines or some sort of cure or whatever, and we're not prepared with making sure that the public is aware and educated on how these things work, and can make choices on their own and don't have to be forced to do something. Like, that's the way you want something to happen. And I don't think we've made any progress in that area. And beyond that, we haven't made any progress in the way that our health system is set up to make sure that people have as much access as possible, so that when something like this that is dire happens, that is so dire, is facing us, that we don't have issues with people accessing spaces at hospitals, or accessing doctors, or accessing treatment. And those things are at a choke point in Canada. In the best of times, I would think that post-COVID, one of the things we would have wanted to learn was that, oh my God, we've got to expand how we resource one of our most important public services, our healthcare system and our pharmacare system. And I say that with a little bit of a giggle, pharmacare system. But we haven't done that work.
No. And proof of that is actually in Manitoba right now, where there's a hepatitis A outbreak that has been spreading for more than a year. It's like,
wow.
In Canada right now, there are 601 hepatitis A cases reported since the outbreak began. It actually began in northern Manitoba. 131 of the cases are now in Winnipeg. The outbreak, this is information from CBC, has led to 133 hospitalizations, 5 people who landed in intensive care,
wow,
and 3 people who've died.
Oh my gosh.
Now that's pretty significant. From 601 reported cases, 3 deaths, 5 people in intensive care. It has been decades since Manitoba has seen an outbreak like this of Hep A. And doctors are saying, like, this is completely preventable, that this is only happening because people are living in atrocious conditions. There are problems with sanitation, sewage management, access to clean water to drink. That comes from Kieran Ginger, who is an internal medicine physician at the Health Sciences Center. And those kinds of conditions allow an illness like hepatitis A to spread. This happens in our own backyard. And I'm just thinking of how CBC had, one of those kind of like online above the fold stories on the hantavirus about everything you need to know about it. I have seen nothing about this outbreak. Nothing about this outbreak.
No, neither have I.
And obviously,
I'm hearing about it now for the first time.
Yeah, and obviously it's hitting Indigenous communities the hardest, because those are the communities that live in the most chaotic situations, in enormous part thanks to the federal government and its continued colonial approach to Indigenous housing and First Nations housing. I think that you don't have to look too much further than that to see how Canada deals with the spread of preventable illnesses. We're not even talking about Ebola, which is like a surprise illness that's not common. That's an absolute disaster that doesn't happen all the time. Hepatitis A, this is something that most of us get, vaccinated against if we're going to go on a vacation somewhere, and it's still an outbreak in Canada.
Yeah, I just feel like there's so much that can be done. And I mean, in this era right now of creeping fascism where everything needs to be turned into some sort of like I mean, the COVID stuff shouldn't have been a polarizing issue. Like in the way that it became, it should have been what it was at the beginning, actually, where everyone was like doing their darndest to try to make sure that everybody was safe. And then it became like a political football. It's like we like the danger of that is so clear as we are looking at the possibility of what disease can do. Like the danger of it is so clear. And there's an opportunity now to at a time like now when there's a majority government federally to do some good education work and for political representatives, for public people who work in public health, to do what they can to get some education out there as much as possible, to make sure that even young people are educated in how health, how disease spreads, what folks can do personally, like what vaccines do, how people, like the options that people have in order to make sure that a community can be as safe as possible when facing some sort of disease. But, I mean, I feel like there's just so much resistance to looking at things squarely and addressing them squarely right now. Like it just feels like, if this is controversial, we shouldn't be looking at it at all, is kind of how our government is moving around things or talking about it. And that it just seems like it's such a recipe for disaster and for having just gone through a disaster, like so many people died of COVID, and has there ever been like even a memorial? I think you and I talked about this once, like nothing to kind of like take in the fact that this huge tragedy happened, and it almost feels like it didn't because we're so resistant to thinking about or discussing it or talking about how to prevent something like that from ever happening again. It just feels like we're moving towards disaster.
Oh, absolutely. Like there's no interest whatsoever in rehashing what's happened, and certainly not rehashing what's happened in the hopes to do anything better. Like the federal government could be pouring money into public health, and they need to be pouring money into public health. Public health is one of these inventions of like the 20th century where governments were realizing that there could be some level of prevention that would help people to avoid the worst things about getting sick. And it grew to be an institution that was really, really important outside of like the hospital healthcare system, because it does touch on so many compounding factors, right? Like that's the thing about public health, is it isn't just about you individually having this illness or being exposed to this illness or, recovering from it. It's about the community and how the community responds to or reacts to or recovers from an illness. And I think that it's like, here's a really good example. Okay. So one of the other illnesses that I try to pay attention to in Canada is tuberculosis. And tuberculosis is still something that people get in Canada, mostly Indigenous people and mostly people that live in remote parts of Canada. So as of April, the tuberculosis rate in northern Saskatchewan, it was 19 times higher than national average. And in that time, around April, there were 22 cases reported in Prince Albert. It was spreading through shelters. Then you have this line from the Chief Medical Health Officer, Dr. Saqib Shahab, and I think it just sums up the challenge, the contradiction, the unfairness in all of our conversations about public health and illness. And he says this, quote, "For the general public on a day-to-day basis, there's no high risk of TB exposure." And it's like, that's true. And he should say that to let people know, like, what their personal, risk of getting TB might be. But that's also the exact opposite of what public health exists to express, which is that, there might be a generalized safety around a particular illness if you are not Indigenous and or poor and or living in a shelter and or living in a remote or rural part of the country. But that's not the message. I mean, like, that message has to be delivered in a very clear way that it's not actually about your personal risk. It's not actually about you feeling like you'll be fine. And we got a lot of that in COVID. What's really important is that it does exist, that there are these outbreaks, that there are these cases, that these illnesses are ravaging certain communities, and the indifference that communities that are not touched by this can then have towards these illnesses, that indifference actually turns deadly. And like, how many MPs represent these communities? Like, there's not many of them, right? The MPs might be concentrated in centers where TB is not like affecting a lot of people, or maybe even any people. And so all of a sudden we have this political problem where, we're waiting for government to do the right thing. And I think that we have to understand that when it comes to pandemics and public health and illness, we can't wait for governments to do the right thing, because it's the majority ruled by a minority, beholden to profit and capital. They're not going to do anything. They're not going to do anything unless they think that it's going to harm the economy. And if people are so marginalized that they are already being harmed by the economy, they're just not a priority for someone like Mark Carney, who, by the way, his father was a principal at a residential school. So, I mean, these are super important conversations, and I really encourage people to do what they can to remove the conversation from the individual, the immediate, your own personal experience, and think always about that public health approach, which is this affects everybody. Doesn't mean that everybody's at equal level of possible harm, but it affects us all. And it's all of our responsibility to make sure we're doing what we can to not cause harm, to not perpetuate harm by ignoring the very, very need that exists to actually fund and help people to not get sick in the first place.